The People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. Education plays a pivotal role in shaping societies. However, at times, education becomes a tool of elitism rather than empowerment. And this dichotomy undermines the fundamental principles of equal opportunity that education should uphold. How do we then dismantle these barriers and foster inclusive educational policies and practices so that societies can harness their full potential to create a more just and equitable world? Let's find out. I'm pleased to welcome to the studio Dr. Carey, Head of International Partnerships at the University of Wolverhampton. Good evening and welcome to Sri Lanka. Welcome to the Capital Maharaja Group.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It is greatly appreciated. And a wonderful question you have there.
Thank you, Dr. Carey. Let's first start with the reason for your current visit to Sri Lanka. The University of Wolverhampton is collaborating with the Maharaja Institute of Management, which is the educational arm of the Capital Maharaja Group, to introduce two new master's programs, one in film and television, one in digital marketing, and this is a world first. Speak to us about this.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here in Sri Lanka. It's a wonderful country, and I've been here in Colombo, a wonderful city, so I'm really pleased to be here. The opportunity to work with Capital Maharaja Group in collaboration with two cutting-edge programs, which is film and TV production and digital marketing at a master's level, are two programs which are so interesting but also very, very career focused. The world has gone digital, and we know that every time we look at our phones, everything is digital. And not so many years ago, you're younger than I am, but people used to get their news from a newspaper and wait ready at the door to pick up their newspaper. Now it's a live feed. The goods and services we often buy, we purchase with a swipe of our phone, with a click. We don't often go to retail in the same way as we used to. So digital marketing skills are absolutely vital for all modern businesses. And if you understand with digital marketing skills, it gives you the opportunity as a young person or a person of any age to get the skills and the understanding to have that impact into the modern world. People buy differently, they think differently, they are influenced in a different manner. So digital marketing captures all those skills in order to get the qualification and the experience that people need to compete in this global world. In terms of film and TV production, it's changed so much. Significantly more technical. The skills that we need are more technical, and this gives you the cutting edge skills that are supported by the wonderful people at Capital Maharaja Group in the infrastructure, but gives you cutting edge UK academic support and guidance.
Dr. Carey, the creative arts has a key role to play in societal transformation. At times we see societies, especially in and across South Asia, where the creative arts are deprioritized. So where we look at doctors and engineers and accountants and lawyers as being better than artists, creators, filmmakers, theatre practitioners. How do we shift this attitude?
I think the attitude is embedded within society, and it is up to us to shift that dial. Because what is interesting is power of the creative arts. So when these super successful lawyers and accountants, what do they do with their money? They go and buy fancy branded watches and glamorous cars with big brands. Who influences their thoughts? It's the creative arts. Otherwise, a Bentley would still go from A to B in the same time in busy traffic as a three-wheeler. Yet they buy a Bentley or have a Rolex watch. They're influenced by the creative arts in what they purchase. And sometimes they aspire to things that are influenced by the creative arts. So the question is, how much the creative arts is really inspiring people that is not recognised. Those aspirational elements that are part of everyday life. We judge people and they judge themselves by their material wealth and the brands they have, but yet that is influenced by the creative world. So I think we need to change that dial, that high status professions should be regarded across the spectrum and not limited to pockets, because those in those pockets are very influenced by the creative arts.
Dr. Carey is shifting gears to a more conceptual line of questioning. It is only strong societies that realize the importance of education as a right that's sans elitism, classism, socioeconomic disparity, and education-driven societies succeed. What are your thoughts on that?
Education is the absolute requirement for society to succeed, and I'm very passionate about education. And if you look at China, for instance, education has been a fundamental part of the economic growth and the success globally of China. Societies that don't value education tend to be societies that do not grow, they do not flourish. The point around the equality of education is something that we have to address as society, whereby it is deemed completely incorrectly that you have to go to a certain school or a certain university or have to be parents of a certain child, or your children have to act in a certain way and behave in a certain way to have the right career. We need to deconstruct that. Why do I say that? Because without education, that baby girl could be the next Einstein. But if she's not given the equal opportunities and education that she deserves, that Einstein may never go beyond a basic career of perhaps working in retail or cleaning. So we have to ensure that education is fairer and that job opportunities are open to all according to their ability, rather than the birth parents that they may have luckily had, or the perceived value of an institution that they went to. So there has to be a lot more equality, there has to be less discrimination on many, many levels, and I'm speaking globally rather than just in Sri Lanka. This discrimination is systemic sometimes within my own country, the UK, whereby only the elites end up as Prime Minister, whether you go to Oxford or Cambridge. There's nobody that comes from my background that ever goes to, that's ever going to be the Prime Minister, and we have to stop that. But globally, we need to reprioritise the equality within education and the opportunities that that education leads to.
How important is it for education institutes to collaborate with other stakeholders across the board, from the state to NGOs to other key actors in this education paradigm?
That's an excellent question. It is absolutely vital because the elite have those connections already. From the moment they are put into the right school, by the right parents, at the right moment, at the right place, their career is marked and that path is set. What we must do is, for those who have less opportunity, is that we have to link those organisations, those stakeholders, to give those opportunities to all. So one of the key areas is employability, whereby perhaps children who come from less privileged backgrounds, they may pass all the IQ tests, but it's not linked into the employability. So we have to encourage employers, the government, the state, stakeholders to view those people for the qualities and capabilities they have, rather than be determined by their background. So that linking up has to be more open and it is a way of equalising things within our society.
For the longest time, we've seen how tech-savvy entrepreneurs from less developed countries being exploited for their skill by other more developed countries in the world. Cheap exploitative labor, modern-day slavery. However, now there is a pushback from these smaller countries. Do you think this is enough, or does more have to be done?
From a personal perspective, I'm absolutely delighted to see that pushback. For generations, and more than that, powerful nations have exploited people in less powerful nations, and that has often been enabled by an elite within that nation. What we have to do is ensure that the profit remains within the country where the majority of work is done. So what do I mean by that? So if a large American corporation manufactures in the USA, the jobs are kept within the USA. But the moment they outsource to another country, lots of poorer Americans are made redundant, homeless, and often in poverty. And that's the side that people don't see. They shift production to a cheaper country, but then they also exploit those people in that cheaper country. Even the owners of the factory get exploited, whereby they get a fraction of the value of the product. And the profit is then taken back to the USA, UK, Europe, Japan, wherever. So what we have to do is encourage entrepreneurs and business leaders to ensure that there is more equality in that relationship, and that products are built and the profit and more of that profit is retained in the country that is doing the most work in actually taking that to the market.
But dominant economies essentially have short-termism.
I think one of the things that is changing, and it's an interesting perspective, and people will probably send me hate mail for this one, is that most Western economies are actually collapsing. It's hidden, but it's collapsing. It's hidden between factors like there is some very wealthy cities, but there's some very, very poor cities that are in long-term decline. So the exploitation is happening in many places around the world, and the West, if you look at the growth of South Asia, you look at the growth of Southeast Asia, and you look at the growth of China, they're all becoming market leaders or close to market leaders in new technology. So you get the Chinese company BYD in terms of electric vehicles, the electric vehicles for the future. They've fast overtaken Tesla as the world's largest producer of electric vehicles. But underpinning money production, it is China that is now leading the world, not Europe or the USA. If you look at economies like India, it is fast becoming a tech supergiant. Now, we may all know the American brands, but if you look at some of the Indian brands, and if you look at some of the Chinese brands, like Lenovo, for instance, they're becoming absolutely huge globally. So there has been a big shift in power from west to east, from north to south, and I see that continuing. The reason why I see that continuing is the Western business model is based on short-term capitalist gain, so short-termism at its height. With China, you have long planned business structures based on a controlled economy. Quite often in South Asia, you have family-run and family-led businesses which look for the long term, not the short term. And ultimately, that long-term planning seems to be winning out.
We are seeing a great deal of political instability across the world, across the developed world. There is the rise of far-right populism. There are wars and conflicts across the world. which disregard international law. How must we move above the chaos that is unfolding before our eyes?
I think for me the most important thing is we have to highlight the chaos and speak out. And we've seen this growth of what is called populism. When I was young it was called right-wing extremism, but suddenly it's now populism. So there is huge amounts of instability in the world. And what we see in my own country, the UK, we had what seemed like a prime minister every week, as there was subplots to remove that person, replace with another person. It looked like something from a restoration drama, that the Duchess of Malfi would have been very content, or perhaps Hamlet would feel completely at home. So the rise of this political instability is based on short-termism, a lack of planning, but also this inability to stand up to the injustices. The world is becoming a very precarious place. What we see in the UK, we've also seen in France, whereby we've seen a rise of the far right. Emmanuel Macron seems to want to hold on in there. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But there's a lot of instability, whether that's within the European Union, but also we see that in the USA, whereby we have Donald Trump, and I do not support in any way the violence of the assassination attempt against him, which is unacceptable at any stage. But what it does do is highlight the dreadful animosity that different camps have towards each other within the political arena, that suddenly you can't have a discussion and a debate and disagree honourably without it seemingly getting physical and leading to either violence or threats on either side. So my wish would be that we dial down that aggression and be able to speak in a candid way, have challenging conversations, but without being physically challenging towards each other.
We're in conversation with Dr. Robin Carey from the University of Wolverhampton. We're going for a short commercial break.
The People's Platform.
We live in a world of progress. But what if progress isn't reaching everyone? Millions of Sri Lankans struggle without access to clean water, safe roads and bridges to a better life. But you have reached out. You have touched their lives. Thank you, Sri Lanka, for making Gammadda the most impactful rural development movement in our nation. Gammadda, for the people, by the people.
Companies play better politics than the politicians of today.
We are not supposed to play with the people's expectation. Then it will be a huge disaster.
When you're bankrupt and when you're going to bankruptcy, two different.
The grandfather is saying it is going to take this long. What does he know?
It's about the lack of sense of humor in Sri Lankans.
Issues that matter the most. Unfiltered discussions. Real answers. Face to face. Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on TV1.
If you want to create your life, create it. This is your opportunity to change your destiny. සඳහි දක්ෂිණ ද්‍රවයට ගොඩ පැසූ අතර මේ ඔවුන්ගේ චන්ද්‍ර ගවේෂණයේ පළමු මෙහෙයුමයි. Bring us to witness Season 4, Saturday at 6:30 p.m. on TV1.
මට විශ්වාසයි වට්ටි පෙරල පෙරල ඇඹුල්කයි.
අර කගවේන ගෙදර හැමෝගෙම උඩක හදන්න ගොඩක් මහන්සි වෙනවා.
දරු සම්පත්ති නෑ කියලා දැනගත්තාම කොහොල්ල ගුලිය දිය වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. ඊට පස්සේ ඔය එල්ලිලා තියෙන හුඟක් දේවල් ගැලවිලා යයි.
අවුලක් තියෙන්නේ ඔයාට ඉම්ලි. ඔයාට ඒක තේරෙනවනේ.
ඒ සද්දෙන් කියවෙන්නේ බෝම්බේ පත්තු වෙන්න වෙලාව පටන් ගත්තා කියලා.
ඉන්නේ අද රාත්‍රී 9:30ට සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්. The People's Platform.
Welcome back. You're watching the People's Platform. My guest tonight is Dr. Robin Carey, Head of International Programs at the University of Wolverhampton. Dr. Carey, when we speak about the global market, the cost of living crisis is something that has harmed most of the working class across the board.
It's quite a strange situation that the people who do most of the work are harmed the most by a cost of living crisis. Yet the people who seem to have the most don't seem to be harmed at all. The cost of living crisis has hit people globally, whether that's the price of food, whether that's the price of fuel, whether that's even getting commodities into the shops. And this is a global phenomenon. When I looked to insure my car, it had quadrupled in price. And I'm scratching my head saying, my car gets older, I'm getting older, I haven't had any accidents, but the price goes up. And what the answer I get? Market forces. What market forces? Then we look at the power costs, the costs of fuel. What we need to unpick from that is the cost of tax. So the higher the cost of fuel, the more tax we pay on fuel and the more those benefit who already are benefiting. So the cost of living crisis has hit people around the world with the cost of food, fuel and services skyrocketing. Wages have not increased, and I think what we have to do on the People's Platform, we have to unpick that and question why is it happening and why at the same time have profits and bonuses increased in many global corporations, yet their prices have skyrocketed and they benefited from the unhappiness and the misery of the many. So it's something we have to challenge, and we have to question those shareholders and why those bonuses are being paid in somewhat an unscrupulous way, whereby people seem to be getting extremely wealthy on the back of a global shortage. That why is there a shortage? Is there really a shortage? Are we suddenly short of power? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of marketing around this to legitimize hyper increased prices, where in reality most of those are unjustified. So we need to get more people involved, and we need to question why those prices have increased, and why is it globally that we're all being affected. And surely we have to question that even more than we've ever done before. And it seems unsustainable, the cost of living crisis that we're all facing. And all that is removing is the opportunity for us to spend. So we're spending more on essentials, less on items that we may wish, but that doesn't benefit society either. So it's a crisis, but it's a global crisis. But yet, so many global corporations seem to be benefiting from these huge price increases. So challenge it, unpick it, and talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, these sentiments for us in Sri Lanka, we're only too familiar with them. So thank you for sharing your perspectives. Let's also discuss the impact of protectionism and tariffs.
It is a strange world. So the free market capitalist model is an interesting one that's fundamentally flawed, but just indulge me, will you? Just indulge me. So the model is that the market is free and we can freely trade with one to another, and the best people, the best products survive. The wealth trickles down and we all benefit from this wonderful utopia whereby dreams come true and everything is wonderful. However, the system doesn't seem to be working. With protectionism, it's a way of one country protecting their industry against the industry that is more competitive than another. So if you truly believe in capitalism, only the most capable countries will survive. Yet they're protecting their own markets and putting tariffs against another country. Other countries, in order to be competitive, have huge state subsidies. So my argument is that protectionism, capitalism, tariffs, it all suggests the system isn't working. And all that happens is the consumer pays more. Companies and countries, their governments seem to get richer because of these tariffs. So the market in terms of tariffs at the moment, the big discussion and debate is, at the moment, is electric cars. So China is managing to produce electric cars at significantly lower prices than the Europeans or the Americans. So what do we do with competition? Well, if you embrace the capitalist model, we should welcome the Chinese products into the countries, and that will give the consumer lower costs for their vehicles and will speed up electrification and zero emissions. So what do they do instead? Put tariffs on them to protect their own industry. Well, that doesn't seem to concur with the benefits of capitalism, which free markets get together and the most competitive wins. Survival of the fittest, Charles Darwin, as we are told. The reality with protectionism is that nobody benefits, because tariffs of 40%, 100%, whatever it may be, makes it more expensive for the consumer, the average person, the working person. So they actually pay more for goods globally. So if country X puts tariffs on country Y, country Y will then put tariffs on country X, and before you know it, the price has gone up huge. And who collects the tariffs? The governments of the world. So they all benefit. So the tariffs and protectionism doesn't benefit the consumer. And that is a fundamental tenet of the capitalist model. So if we're moving into a model whereby it's state controlled, then capitalism has failed, possibly. Certainly worth a discussion.
Dr. Carey, we also need to talk about the harsh consequences of war on supply chains.
Yeah. When I was young, and that was a very long time ago, products were made locally. Wherever you were in the world, your food was sourced locally. Products were made locally, whether that be textiles, manufactured goods. You may have imported some things like raw materials, but many of the things we used on a daily life were made locally, produced locally. What's happened? It's called globalization. So somebody's come up with this wonderful idea that globalization. And what we have is global supply chains. So if there is a problem in Yemen related to the passage of ships nearby with goods manufactured in China that are going to be used in India or worked in South Asia or Europe, that supply chain means that there is a shortage of products going from countries where they're manufactured to other countries. So why is that important? Well, if you've got a car factory in the UK and you're waiting for a component which is coming from Taiwan, which can't actually ship it to you because there's a dispute or there's industrial action or there's a problem, it means you can't build any cars. Yet that then means other issues, that if you're working in food processing and you need one ingredient to make food that is imported, but its supply chain is many thousands of miles away, it means you can't make that product. So having global supply chains then has a profound effect, not only in the price of a product, but whether that product can be produced. So with the instability in the world, and we mustn't forget to mention the war between Russia and Ukraine and the consequences of it. Russia blockading the Black Sea, it then stops Ukrainian grain to be exported for food products, which then has a direct effect on the global price of bread and wheat, oats, maize-related products that Ukraine is so superb at producing. So you have a localized war between two countries with global consequences because of the supply chain.
What's the gender dimension between conflict and economic crisis?
The gender. Well, I think we probably know that most wars are created by men, which probably would suggest that too many men are in too many powers of position, and there needs to be significantly more women in position of power. But that really gets back to our earlier question. So if we have more equality in the educational market, if we have greater diversity in people coming in to business, having positions of authority, and that can only be done by education, then we have to encourage young women, young girls to have the right level of education to get into organisations where they have positions of influence. But I can't think of a single war that was started by a woman. Somebody's probably going to ring in now and say, I've actually just Googled this, and in 1862 there was a one war in one country. But let's take it as we can't think of any major conflicts that were caused by women. And I think I can only apologise on behalf of my gender for how badly we lead, and that's something we need to really readdress. But getting back to that educational piece, I do believe that with a greater dynamic within education and equality and diversity, we won't just get the same types of people, generally the same types of men from the same types of backgrounds making the same types of decisions, because let's face it, they never go to war. It's the poor that go to war, and it's the poor that pay. Whether that be women or men, it is the poor that always pay as a consequence. So I think the educational piece is that we need to encourage a greater equality and diversity within the workplace and give those opportunities, and I would have and would give my full support to significantly more women having key roles both in society, both in business and as global leaders. And I always find it shocking when you see these United Nations and it's like 99% men in suits who are all the same. There's very few women in key roles, and that is still extremely disappointing and unacceptable for the time that we live.
We need to end this interview on a positive note. So what's the way forward in terms of mainstreaming qualitative, inclusive education?
Firstly is we talk about this on platforms, and there is a tipping point in all things in life, whether that's equality, whether that's something which is right, something which is wrong. And you look back on things like slavery, appalling behaviour by colonial powers, which Britain was one of the key architects. What we have is a tipping point, and now we look back on that and say that is wrong, it's unacceptable, it is appalling, and we highlight that all the time, and we must keep on doing that. So what we have to do as a society and people is that we must push towards that tipping point between this is acceptable and this is not acceptable, and we need more voices, more people who are willing to stand up and speak about it and say that it's not acceptable. When we get to that critical mass, a tipping point occurs, and it's only through mobilising people, mobilising voices and supporting that you hit that point. But when we hit that point, there is no going back. So my encouragement to all people is push for the tipping point, keep on pushing. Your voice is important, your beliefs are important, and to support that greater equality, the equal opportunities for all, to push away the discrimination that still exists. We push it to that tipping point, and that's when things change and things will change, have changed, and must change.
Fantastic. Dr. Robin Carey, thank you for sharing these fabulous perspectives.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again next week. Good night.
TV1. TV for life.
Presidential election on the 21st of September. Acceptance of nominations on the 15th of August. President Ranil Wickremesinghe to contest as an independent candidate. 4 candidates deposit bonds on the first day. Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna to announce decision on presidential candidate on Monday. Frequent changes in the acting IGP position every 2 weeks could lead to challenges through election petitions, says President. Prime Minister rejects Supreme Court's order on Deshamandu Tennakun. National Police Commission rejects IGP's request for the immediate transfer of 210 police officers. Price of bread reduced by 10 rupees. French high-speed rail line sabotaged hours before Olympic opening ceremony.
TV1. TV for life.
සිම්පත හරියට ලියාපදිංචි කරගෙන තියෙන්න ඕන. සමහර වෙලාවෙම දන්නෙත් නැහැනේ. මේ සිම්පත කොයි තරම් වැදගත්ද කියලා මේ දුරකථන පාවිච්චි කරන හැම දෙනාම දන්නේ නැහැ කියලා තමයි මම කියන්නේ. මේ වලින් පස්සේ ලොකු ගම් වතුර තත්ත්වයක් එන්න නියමිතයි කියලා. කාලගුණ විද්‍යාඥයින් අනතුරු අංගවන පසුබිමක ඔබ කොයි විදිහටද මේ අපේ තෙත්බිම් සම්බන්ධයෙන් දකින්නේ?
කොළඹ නගරයේ තියෙන නාගරික තෙත්බිම් වලින් 21%ක් තියෙන නාගරික තෙත්බිම් වලින් වැසි ජලයෙන් 39%ක් රඳවා ගන්න බව.
වෙලත් නගරයේ කටයුතු කරන කට්ටිය දැන් එනවා පරිපාලනය නගරයට. ඔතුමේ දන්නවා හැටි අපි ගත්තොත් තරවතු කොට. එහෙම නැත්නම් කිඹුලවල ප්‍රදේශයේ අපිට තියෙනවා රැයට කෑම කඩ. ඉස්සර එක තිබ්බ කොහෙද? කොළඹ. දැන් ගොඩ දෙනෙක් මේ පැත්තට එන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. මොකද ඒගොල්ලන්ට අර පොළ පාට ගතිය. ඒ තියෙන බ්‍රීස් එක කියන්නේ එඟට දැනෙන වෙනස අනිවාර්යෙන් දැනෙනවා.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට රට තොට පිට රට වට පිට හැමදේම හැමදාමත් මුලින්ම කලින්ම දැනගන්න උදේ 8 සිට එක වෙනතුරු එක දිගට පුවත් පැය 5ක් ඇහැරෙන්න TV1 සමග Newsfirst morning on TV1 ජූලි 8 වෙනි සඳුදා සිට
Final Cut Unedited.
මේ දේශපාලන පිටියේ උණුසුම Final Cut Unedited.
Final Cut Unedited.
පක්ෂක නායකත්වයේ ඉඳන් කාටවත් ස්වාධීන වෙන්න අමාරුයි.
පක්ෂෙත් දිනවනවා, රටත් දිනවනවා, පාක්ෂිකයත් දිනවනවා. ඒකට පුළුවන් හොඳ අපේක්ෂකයෙක් අපි ඉදිරිපත් කරනවා.
බැලට් පේපර් එකේ අපේ ලකුණ තියෙනවා පොහොට්ටුව, ඒ වගේම අපි අපේක්ෂකයෙක් ඉදිරිපත් කරනවා.
අපේ ස්ථාවරය නම් ශ්‍රී ලංකා පොදුජන පෙරමුණෙන් අපේක්ෂකයෙක් ඉදිරිපත් වෙන්න ඕන.
බේදුවෙන තරමට වාසිය එන්නේ එතනටයි එකමුතු වෙච්ච පාර අපි පෙරදුනා.
හොඳ මගුලක් කන්න නම් නිත්‍යානුකූල විදියට බඳින්නත් ඕන, අනාගත ළමයි හම්බෙන්නත් ඕන.
පොදුජන පෙරමුණේ අපේක්ෂකයෙක් මේ ජනාධිපතිවරණයේ ඉන්නවා. පොදුජන පෙරමුණේ අපි එයාව ජනාධිපති කරනවා.
ස්වාධීන අපේක්ෂකයෙක් හැටියට අප මුදල් තැන්පත් කිරීමම පරාජයේ මූලික පෙරනිමිත්තක් හැටියට අපි දකිනවා.
නාමල් රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයාට වෙලා තියෙන මේ දුක මේ රටේ මේ කාටවත් ඇති නොවේවා කියලා ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා.
ඉතිහාසයේ මැතිවරණ ඕන් තරම් කොල්ල තියෙන ඔබට කට පුරවලා. ඔයාලා 2015 රනිල් ගෙනාපු එක වැරදිද?